Aloha, folks, and welcome to another edition of Five Questions, a conversation that appears not only here on News Radio 830 KHVH, but also on the homepage of HawaiiReporter.com. He's a gentleman that's been part of the island fabric for years, and you're very familiar, I'm sure, with our guest today, and that would be Ed Case, senatorial candidate. Officially now we can say that, right, Ed?
Absolutely. It was official as of yesterday, and I'm an official candidate, and there's no going back.
And there we have it. Well, listen, Ed, let's jump it with the very first question out of five. The obvious one is, tell us why you'd like to be a U.S. Senator from Hawaii.
Fundamentally, I think we need to fix Washington. I think Washington is not doing the job for our country. It's certainly not doing the job for our Hawaii. And I think the real issue in Washington today has nothing to do with the soundness of our country and of our democracy. I believe deeply in our country. I believe in our democracy. And I believe that our future can be bright. But that's different from believing that inside Washington is getting the job done for our country right now. I think it is not. I think it is failing all of us because it is simply not acknowledging our challenges, not facing up to the options, and not identifying the best direction forward and making decisions. That's what Washington needs to be doing for all of us. Its job is to sit there, analyze, and decide at the end of the day, and that's not happening because we're just too stuck in incredible division from a partisan perspective, from a philosophical perspective, and nobody there seems to be doing what any of us have to do in our families, what certainly I've had to do in my business activities over the last 3 decades, and that is try to find the problem, try to find the common sense solutions, try to problem solve, try to be inclusive where you can, but ultimately make those decisions. And as a result, we just have too many airplanes stacked up trying to land, from growing our economy to the budget to I could go on and on. Mm-hmm. I think I can play a role in going to Washington and fixing Washington because my mindset is not the pure partisan approach. My mindset is not the stuck inside Washington, D.C. approach. It is get there, find your friends, find the people that want to solve the problems of our country, and get the job done. And I think that's what we want in Washington, all of us, and I think I can get that job done.
Let me go just a quick follow-up. And can you cite briefly, Ed, an example of this broken element that we have in Washington today?
Yeah, well, let's take an example. For example, I would pick Social Security. Okay. All right. I mean, that just came off the top of my head because I was talking about it with somebody else, but I could give you a lot of others. But Social Security, as it stands, I think it's a great program. I don't want Social Security to end. I think it's helped a lot of people over the years and can continue to be a key part of our country's fabric and agreement with each other. But it's very, very clear that Social Security is on an unsustainable path, an unsustainable financial path. And it has to be modified right now in order for us to sustain it over time for the folks that are depending on it later in their life. And by the way, I'm one of them. I mean, I've been paying into Social Security for decades now, and I certainly would like to see some benefits when I get to that age. Now, what you've got to do with Social Security is a little bit like what you have to do with the federal budget overall. You have to just take a look at rebalancing the revenues and the expenses, and it's not rocket science as to what the options are or what the solutions are. And yet Washington fails to even acknowledge that there is a problem because it's too tough to deal with politically, and it certainly is not getting into the solutions. And as a result, we've lost a good 10 years now when if we had solved this problem 10 years ago when we knew it was coming at us, we'd be in great shape today. Instead, it's a worse problem today. It's a lot tougher to solve, and yet we have to do it. And so, this is just a matter of avoiding the overall problem and solution, making it worse. Another example we talked about on your show just a few days ago, and that's immigration. Mm-hmm. It's very clear that the solution on the immigration lies in a blend of perspectives, not in one extreme or the other extreme. We cannot govern this country from the extremes anymore. We've got to get down into the middle and find those common solutions that work for all.
We're talking with Ed Case. It is 5 questions, and we appreciate Ed being with us here today. Let's continue on. Question number 2. The national debt. It is just an amazing number. It's difficult for us to wrap our heads around it. Approaching, if not at $15 trillion, at least hovering near there. And it's perceived to be a national security issue, Ed. Do you agree with that statement? And if so, how is our national debt a national security issue.
I absolutely agree with that issue. I completely agree that our national debt crisis, and I will say it's a crisis because I believe it's a crisis, is an issue that touches each and all of us in many different ways. Obviously, one way it touches us is just in the fact that each of us is carrying a mountain of that national debt. We all carry a portion of that national debt as citizens of this country. We are mutually obligated to that. That's money that our government, we through our government, owes to other people. So that does affect us, and I certainly don't want my children to have the same level of debt as I'm bearing and you're bearing here today. So it affects us on that level. It affects us very much on an economic level because the higher the national debt, the harder it is for an economy to thrive and prosper on several levels. If your government is not able to provide the core government functions that do in fact lay the foundation for solid economic activity because it's too busy paying too much of its money over in interest, that affects us all directly. If our government carries way too much national debt, especially as a share of our gross domestic product, it drags the entire economy down, as we've seen in countries like Greece and Spain and elsewhere in the world. And finally, any economist will tell you that if you carry too much national debt, sooner or later it's going to catch up with you in terms of higher interest rates. Mm-hmm. And we've been lucky and fortunate for several years now in terms of low interest rates, but for anybody to take that for granted, that's somebody that doesn't understand how economics works. And then, of course, finally, the issue that we talked about that you led with, which is how is this a national security issue? Well, first of all, it's a national security issue because the stronger our economy, the stronger our financial foundation, the stronger our country. And the stronger our country, the better we are at defending ourselves from threats as they arise in the world, and the better we are at funding our national defense so that we can be sure we continue to lead the world and defend ourselves. But more importantly, we have to look at where are we borrowing this money from. We're not just going out there and inventing this money that we're borrowing. It's being borrowed from foreign countries, especially China. That's the thing that bothers me the most about our national debt, as a matter of fact, is the fact that we're sitting here borrowing the money from China, who's got a fair bit of cash around right now, and China's very happy to take our money from the fact that we have a trade imbalance with China and then lend it back to us, thereby creating leverage over us. And I do not want to be leveraged in any way, shape, or form to China over the next 25 years. That is about national security. And so when I look at the issues that face us in Congress today, and I ask myself, what are the top three issues? What are the top macro issues in Congress right now and in our country right now? They are these three: fixing Washington, which we've already talked about, solving our national deficit and debt, which we are talking about now, and, of course, growing our economy. Those three are all interrelated. They're not stovepipe issues. They all relate to each other. But the national debt is really a crucial one that has to be gotten under control. And same basic observation on the national debt. You cannot solve the national debt crisis from the extreme. You can't say, well, it's my solution only my solution, and everybody else's solution, forget it. It's got to be a blend that spreads around the pain, spreads around the responsibility, and tries to bring people together to some consensus solution as to how to proceed.
Talking with Ed Case, this edition of 5 Questions here on News Radio 830 KHVH and also on HawaiiReporter.com. Ed, we're going to go to the next question. This is the 2-year anniversary of Obamacare. Can you give us your thoughts about this legislation and Obamacare at large, please?
Well, this is really a mixed answer from me because in some ways Obamacare, as you refer to it, the National Health Care Act, there's elements of it that I'm very, very uncomfortable with. As we know, the Supreme Court taking up next week the entire decision, the entire question of the constitutionality of the Health Care Act, both from an individual mandate perspective and from the perspective of requirements on the states on Medicaid. this is what I can say, because when I'm asked, do you believe in simply repealing the law, I have to say that my answer to that is no. I cannot support just an outright repeal. And the reason I can't do that is because I don't believe that the status quo before the law was enacted was acceptable. The status quo before the law was enacted left incredible numbers of Americans uninsured, all the way uninsured, 40-plus million Americans without the ability to get insurance, and those that were able to get insurance were the cost of insurance were ramping up way too rapidly, and there were just too many conditions being imposed by the insurers, which left people in need out of the ability to get reasonable health care. So in some ways, although my instincts are always to let the private sector solve a problem and keep government out of it, I simply don't think that the private sector was solving this particular problem. And I do believe that there was a need to come in and correct elements of our national health care law, like pre-existing conditions, which bother me greatly if they're imposed on you, so you can't get health care, like creating greater competition with a rapidly centralizing private health care and health insurance industry, which I think is always dangerous when you have too much of a centralization of economic power and control to approach monopoly status. That's always going to leave too many people out. So my question on the national health care law is not, I can't say it's about repeal, because I don't know where we would go back to, and I can't go back to where we were. If it's about modifying the law, if it's about adjusting the law along the way, I'm all for that, because I think this is obviously a huge law for our country, and has many areas in which if we were wrong in terms of the implementation of it, could really hurt us. So my overall approach on that is, it is the law of our country today until the Supreme Court rules it unconstitutional. I'm not in favor of full repeal, but I am in favor of taking a look at it along the way in major and minor ways to make it work. The job here is to make sure that all Americans can afford to carry reasonable, accessible health care insurance.
Talking with Ed Case in our series of 5 questions. Thanks for that, Ed. And, it's top of mind in question number 4 in all quarters. The price of gas, energy costs, and of course we're unique in Hawaii from other states because of our geographic location and our need. But if someone were to ask you, Ed, and I'll do exactly that, who's to blame for high gas prices today, how would you respond?
The fundamental culprit in high gas prices is a very simple thing to articulate, and that is that there is too much demand for too little supply. And that's going to ramp gas prices up, or any other price up, anytime it happens. And so I believe in being really direct and honest with people, and I don't believe in beating around the bush in terms of trying to lay off blame all over the place if it's a pretty direct and simple explanation. And I also don't believe in saying to folks or trying to say to folks that there's an easy solution to a problem that I know darn well is a hard problem. Yeah. The problem with gas is that there is too much control over gas supplies, or oil supplies, I should say, throughout the world. Too much centralization of control. Too little of it coming out of the ground and being processed. As compared to the demand. We know that China, again, is coming up with its demand very rapidly. We have whole countries out there like India that are just starting to consume a lot more. There's just too little of it. And so that's fundamentally the reason. Now, there's a lot of other reasons. Shortage in terms of refining capacity in our country, for example. The fact that right here in Hawaii we have a real centralization in terms of the delivery of the production and delivery of gas to all of us, which leaves us particularly exposed, especially given our geographical location. So I don't think that there's a silver bullet on gas prices. I think that we can obviously address the problem in the short term by increasing supply, and I believe in doing that. But over over the long run, we simply have to face the reality that oil generally and gas specifically is going to become an increasingly scarce commodity. And if we don't get on to other forms of energy, we are going to continue to be exposed to these rapid ramp-ups in gas prices that have really crippled us and are affecting us obviously here right now. So my solution over the mid to the long term is a complete investment in alternative energy so that we can, in fact, get away from the whole idea that we have to rely on gas prices to start with. So I'm talking biofuels. I'm talking, solar, and I'm talking of the whole range of renewable energy research and development, where we have to not only do this for ourselves and our country and our consumers, but it's an incredible economic opportunity for us because we do the best research and development in the world, especially in alternative energy, both nationally and here. So as we create the situation in which we can focus focus our economic power and the power of our minds, which is really still the greatest in the entire world, on solving alternative energy overall, and producing technologies that are that can serve as alternatives to fossil fuel-based energy, we're going to help our economy. We're going to help ourselves right here in Hawaii. We can do it here in Hawaii as well. We're already doing it in many different areas. It can be an economic driver for us right here.
Talking with Ed Case, of course, in our edition of 5 Questions, and we appreciate Ed being with us. And finally, Ed, as a U.S. Senator dealing with national security issues, there's one that looms large, of course. It's in the Middle East, and it's with the United States, and specifically addressing the Iranian nuclear question, but also our support and advocacy for our ally in Israel. Can you take kind of the two parts, address your relationship or what you believe our national relationship should be with Israel, and secondarily to that, your thoughts about the Iranian nuclear scenario?
Well, first of all, just speaking directly to Israel, Israel is our ally, and Israel has been our ally for decades now, just as many other countries in the world are our allies, in which we have an agreement and an understanding that we will help each other, support each other, and defend each other. And the reason for that is twofold. First of all, because we share a common set of values in terms of how to govern ourselves, democratic governments, number one, and because we want to share both the benefits of international trade and economic and cultural exchange with those countries, and because it makes sense to both of us and all of us to kind of hang together against some of the threats that have occurred to us out there throughout the rest of the world and will occur to us going forward. And so we can't just kind of enter into a deal with a friend that says we're going to be allies and then walk away from an ally when the ally has any trouble. That is not the way for us to conduct ourselves out there in the world, and that's not the way for us to lead the world, because I believe that our country continues to be a leader in this world and should continue to be a leader in this world, and leaders honor deals. And so I believe that our relationship to Israel needs to continue, that it's been good, and that it needs to continue and should continue for a number of different reasons. Now, going to Iran from that premise, and I should say also that when I talk about Iran, I'm not talking about Iran from the perspective of the direct threat that I think Iran does pose to Israel. So this is not driven by, what's the effect on Israel. Now, if you're in Israel, it's going to be completely driven by the direct effect and threat of Iran on Israel. My view on it is much more macro than that. My view is that we cannot allow, if at all possible, countries out there in the world who are our enemy, or who say that they're our enemy, and who take it a step further and actually represent that they would attack us if they had a chance, and who we know darn well are out there in the world undermining us. And I don't mean us, just the United States. I mean those of us in the world that want to advance democracy, want to advance freedom, want to advance a good, solid world, and have the direct history of having done that, and we know already that Iran has done that. We know that Iran, through proxies elsewhere, Syria would be one example, has in fact attacked our allies. Mm-hmm. We can't allow that situation to continue with the presence by those countries of weapons of mass destruction. In other words, weapons that can in fact harm an incredible number of people and cause an incredible disruption in the world. So in Iran, the problem of Iran is that you have both a government there that is sworn to do us harm and trying to obtain weapons that simply are not acceptable from the perspective of that kind of a government. Now, so that's the interest that we have in making sure that Iran does not gain nuclear weapons. Is we don't want them used against us eventually or leveraged against us eventually with that country saying that they want to do us some harm. What do you do about it? I don't think that you intervene unilaterally in Iran. I do not believe that that's the right way for our country to approach it. I believe that the way we are approaching it, and I think, by the way, that this is one of those few examples today in our country where there is a bipartisan, nonpartisan consensus. So I believe that generally, and I'm not talking about the extremes, because one extreme says you never do anything with Iran, and the other extreme says, go ahead and, go after them right now. I don't believe either of those is really a mainstream view of the country. But I think that President Obama and the leaders in Congress, both Republican and Democratic, generally believe that the way we need to do it is exactly what we're doing it right now, which is work with the rest of the world, with our allies in the rest of the world, and sometimes even with our adversaries in the rest of the world who want the same thing. They do not want a nuclear-armed Iran because they consider Iran nuclear-armed to be just as much of a threat to them and to world order and stability as anybody else. So I think the direction we're taking is exactly the right direction to take, to increase the economic and other sanctions on Iran, to make it unacceptable to Iran for Iran to continue to develop their nuclear weapons. I think that's the way we've got to go right now.
Fantastic. We really do appreciate you taking the time, Ed, to expand on some of these questions, and I'm sure as the campaign goes on, I hope we can do this again as events tend to change. So we wish you all the best, and I want to thank you again for joining us today.
I want to thank you for having me on. We welcome everybody to our campaign at edcase.com. Thank you for letting me get that in.
Absolutely. Not a problem at all, Ed. Hey, thanks so very much. All the best to you, and we'll chat soon, okay?
Okay. Aloha.
Thanks, Ed. Aloha to you. Bye now.